I was just born inside of the church. You know, I went to a Baptist church. I wasn't aware of a lot of these things. My parents were pro-black because they had gone through the 60s. And so the impact of that movement had been significant on them. They were, I'm black and I'm proud, you know, all these things. They were, you know, they promoted that to us. So we saw Africa as like, at least in my family, we saw Africa as like where we're from, is our heritage, and other black people as connected to us, even if they're, you know, from a different place or whatever. But we were Christian, we were going to church, just normal. I remember one time we went to like a white church, and I was like trying to, you know, because it's the same religion, but I'm trying to talk to my dad, and I'm like, so that was different. I didn't know that's just like a different thing. And he's like, yeah, it's a different thing. You know, and so like, I think that part of what it is that black people worship differently. That's how we understood it. Black people worship differently. But, you know, come to find out later that, you know, the catching the Holy Ghost and some of the other Christian traditions, particularly the traditions where there's a lot of the Holy Ghost catching, and then they're dancing and they got all these ceremonies around that and all that stuff like that. Well, that's not what other people are doing. And even like the way that we do with singing, you know, like there's like, because my dad sang, so there's this whole big thing with the music and singing, and you know, you can like feel the spirit and this whole discussion of the spirit and all that. I don't necessarily think that was going on in like white churches. But there's different denominations, and our denomination wasn't doing a ton of that. But, you know, I think just the coming up in the black community, coming up in the black church, oriented me towards spirit and a very sincere and deep relationship with a God you believe in. And you're singing and you're praising and you're interacting, you're connecting to the divine. It's not like an intellectual concept. You know what I mean? And so I think that that set the tone for some of the stuff that happened to me later.
When is later?
Around high school, I started to kind of like have something that was like an awakening. So I would pray, but now when I prayed, I felt something in my heart. But I don't mean like metaphorically. I mean, I felt like it was like something
physical, something
right.
Physical.
And it was something strange with my breath, but it had like, it was like a good feeling, and it had something, it felt meaningful. So I would pray longer and longer. Like I would pray until I felt that feeling, and then I would stop, right? And so I would pray longer and longer and longer. You know, I'd be on the bus, get off the bus, gotta pray. Walking down the street, gotta stop and pray. So it started to look weird, but I didn't have any frame of reference for it. I just, you know, and so that stuff started happening. I started praying much longer at dinner and just different times. And this feeling was going more and more and more and more and more. So, you know, when I finally went away to college, I had a bunch of things go on. But when I learned about meditation, it was a done deal, because that's what was happening. You know, that I didn't have any words for, but that's where it was going. Mm-hmm. So when I learned about meditation, I just started doing that. And then meditation is like the doorway to trance and all that.
The rabbit hole. How do you find connected with the community in that sense? Because we now know everything around us, but how you connected that? It was a very particular, very individual experience of you.
I have a perspective on that stuff. Sometimes people think about African spirituality or black spirituality as a series of specific things, like Ocha is specific. I can't say, oh, I went to Cuba and I felt Oshun, so I'm doing Ocha. They would be like, no, you have to like do certain things. for me, I think that African spirituality is what African people do.
Okay.
Or it's what African people are.
Even if the practice have another name?
Even if we're dead. It does not matter what you're doing. It doesn't matter what you're calling it. Because we come with our ancestors. We come with gifts that we inherit through our lineages. Those things come on, whether you want to or not. People are born with these things. We are already spirits and souls and things like that. So it doesn't matter what we could be doing chess, but those things pop up. And I think that's one of the things that happens in the African American experience, because you strip away all the culture sometimes. You could have a black kid that's raised in a white house, completely stripped from the culture, and you'll start to see certain things just awkwardly come online. You know, the way that they socialize with other kids, you can see how sometimes it doesn't fit. And that's maybe not for everybody, but I've seen examples where it was like, you could see how it just doesn't fit. And because we socialize different. There's a different way that we actually are. So the spirituality, no matter what you call it, that stuff starts coming online. And so for me, yeah, I did meditation, I wound up doing yoga and things, but the people who were doing it were all black people. So when we do yoga and we meditate, we're not seeing Shiva and Shakti. We're seeing our ancestors. And particularly in this community, there were people who, as part of their own journey, had become part of the Orisha tradition, Palo and things like that. They're all around. They're our friends. It's all around. So we're meditating. We're not participating, but now when I go and meditate, who do I see in meditation? You know, we see the Orisha and those things like that in our meditation.
In that sense, I make this interview with cousin in Colombia, and he told me that for him, Hoodoo is not a religion or a set of practices, but a culture in general, and that when you see that in a religious way, it is even Christian. It's an African interpretation of Christianity, no other stuff, and that's why you can find too many Christian stuff inside, because it's even a flourishing of Christianity in an African community.
Okay.
So, but there is a lot of people that is no Christian and still do Hoodoo.
Right. Yeah, that's more modern though. We were all Christian like a couple generations ago. I mean, except for like, you know, the Nation of Islam. Everybody's Christian.
All right.
So recently, you know.
But so
But yeah, they still
right.
do Hoodoo. Yeah, nowadays.
Okay, nowadays you can find the split, but not in the beginning.
Well, in the beginning, I've read on the plantation, we weren't immediately converted. So people were practicing whatever their African traditions were, but you're next to other people, and so initially people had ethnic lines that they didn't cross, but that they started to cross those lines in time, you know, and so you know, Hoodoo, you know, root doctors and midwives and things are on the plantation. They are medicine. They are the traditions. You have the hush harbors where people were running away secretly in the woods at night, and they had traditions around practicing what they did. There's slave records of people going away and practicing what they're calling voodoo, you know, and they describe it. So, you know, they had a cauldron and, you know, different stuff that they had on the plantation. Eventually, and I hear it was actually late in slavery, like toward the end, there was a movement to Christianize the slaves completely. Now they had church and stuff, but you know, they're probably going to church and then they go and do their thing, they do both or whatever. But eventually there was a movement to Christianize, and they destroyed the traditions, the root doctor tradition and the granny midwife tradition. The medical establishment started saying you can't practice medicine without a license. So it became illegal to be a root doctor in certain areas.
Christianity was imposed to black, or black embraced Christianity?
I think it's both.
But
I think both happens. I think I was told that by my friend's anthropologist. I was told that black people, there was a movement to Christianize the people. But you also got to remember too, one tradition is illegal. So you're trying to run away and hide and do that in the woods.
So you will do it.
The other tradition, you have a day off to go to church and do. So
of course, you're buying in the
and you're a slave, you know. So like they're all going to be in church, you know what I'm saying? But what else are they doing, you know? But eventually there was a movement to just like make everybody actual Christians.
Okay, this other side of the licensing, that you can practice medicine if you don't have a license. It was an economical strategy, or was more political, more?
Well, I'm sure that the medical establishment would say that, you know, whatever, they give some sort of a bland, vanilla expression of why they did it, but they destroyed the root doctor tradition. Yeah. So these people were open doctor on the plantation. They were the doctors. You didn't have a hospital. Where slaves aren't going to the hospital. You're not gonna have a white doctor set up on the plantation for your slaves. I mean, maybe, but not that I know of. They were practicing medicine and birthing their own children in their own traditions. So that's what the root doctors were on the plantation. So they were like mainstream medicine for the black people.
So this is how the root work come inside the church. Surreptitious, but emerging.
Yeah, so what they say is when they did forced conversion, that is exactly what happened. The root doctors went and became the preachers. I've been told that. I don't remember who told me that. But that, yeah, they went in the church and they started hiding things in the church. And you know, I think one generation may go and hide something and the next generation's like, well, this is what we do. They don't necessarily...
they don't need to understand what
the depth of the nuance. Eventually, people are Christian, you know, and you know, are slaves carrying around Bibles when they're not allowed to read? I think for the most part, people are not using Bibles in slavery. People can memorize verses, but that's different. So I think, you know, later on, after slavery, you have probably much more access to Bibles, much more of like a Christianization. Everybody's Christian for the most part, you know.
There is also this, I came to find out that Hoodoo doesn't work with God. Somebody told me that it do and those. It's, yeah. Well,
They say all kind of things online. The impression that I have is twofold. Like, I'm from the north. I'm from Seattle.
Okay.
But I've been living in the South for like half my life. I'm 42. Yeah. And I left at 17 and moved to the South.
Okay.
The South is like a different country in a rural South.
Yeah.
So the people will think, I mean, Atlanta's different, but like the rural South, people talk different, think different. It's a different place. A lot of these Northerners, young Northerners, are disconnected from the old culture where their families would have been for generation after generation after generation. Now, some of them have been in the North for a while, but some of them came up through the migration. They were fleeing like the Klan and the abuse that was happening after slavery. So they're disconnected from like family-owned land, big family living all together, and all the traditions that existed in those spaces. They're fleeing the poverty, they're fleeing the abuse. So now, online, when these people are, like young people are talking in these groups, you got tens of thousands of people having these conversations. They say all kind of stuff. They don't know. They're saying things that they read or somebody else said. And
okay, well, what do you know about that?
I mean, my knowledge is limited too, right?
Right,
but so yeah, to me, I am black. Like, I did grow up in a black community. Like, I'm not confused.
Yeah.
So the notion that there are black people that don't have gods in America is weird to me. I don't know. Where are they? You have to point to me where they exist. And there's no group of grandmothers that I remember in the 80s that were godless. I don't know where that would be.
It could be Christian or African, but some kind of gods.
They're all going to be Christian.
Are gonna be Christian.
I mean, at that point, yeah, they're all going to be Christian in my experience. But they all have a deep, profound relationship with God. You know, and the hoodoos I mean, it's possible because you got some people who are like rebels. You know, you have people who are like bootleggers and like outlaws. So they may not have had like that's why when you try to make blanket statements about hoodoo, I think you're going to run into trouble.
Okay.
Because there are some families who are like bootleggers and stuff. And so their orientations are probably not very religious.
Okay.
Because they're outlaws anyways. So how they do their hoodoo, I don't know. But most black people in this country believe in God, and so the God of hoodoo would be God and Jesus. That's who they believe in.
Okay, let's clarify something at this point, because I think this could be the root of any other problem. The root work is not a religion exactly. It's a cultural practice about healing, right? Even if it involves some magic.
Well,
no,
even that's not it.
No.
So on the plantation, people were practicing things that look very much like religion. I mean, they were practicing voodoo. You know,
Yeah.
they people had shrines, because there's a thing called African American archaeology or something like that, plantation archaeology. So they'll dig underneath the houses where the slaves lived, and they find shrine objects that were buried.
Okay.
So one place they'll find Igbo shrines underneath the ground, Igbo style. In Galveston, apparently they had brought in a bunch of Cuban slaves, and they find something that's a pot with a chain wrapped around it. I don't know whether they had iron in it, but we know what that is. And they had something that was there that looked like it was Congo related as well. So anyways, I'm sorry, I'm getting off track, but there's all this stuff that people have that does signify something that might look more like a religion, particularly on the plantation. So I wouldn't say that it's not a religion when you're talking about the plantation. Particularly, there's a lady named Katrina Hazard Donald who writes about this. Her book is called Mojo Working. She sees the original form of hoodoo as the merger of African traditions on the plantation. And in the hush harbors where they're worshiping, that it is in fact a full-on religion at that time.
Okay. So everything come from voodoo in one way, or take one way, or take another.
All kind of things. It's coming from all kind of things. It's coming from all, not just voodoo. It's coming from the different, because we come from all over Africa.
Yeah.
So one thing that was interesting is you got people who are Muslim. People have no idea what that means. There were these Muslim Africans, right?
Yeah.
But so the Muslims in Africa, they're practicing Islam. But a lot of these people are full-on traditionalists, absolute, complete traditionalists. They just also practice Islam. So they have these local traditions about how they're engaging Jinn, right? So throughout Georgia, I think, and the Sea Islands, there were all these like Muslim Africans, I guess, or a presence of Muslim Africans. But they're gonna bring their stuff too. So we have Grigri here in I think, well, I don't know, I think New Orleans, but maybe it's in a number of different places. But they say, okay, we know this came from the Bamana people because there was a lot of them. And in the Sea Islands, you have the Mende people. These are all people with the heritage of the Mali Empire.
Okay.
And some of them are Muslim, maybe with the Bamana less so because they were resisting Islam. But they all carry their traditions.
You told me your family tradition is traditionally Baptist.
Yeah, well, I mean, they were when they had me. I don't remember what churches they came from. I think there were some AME churches and stuff like that in there.
Okay, but your family come from the north too? Or?
So my mother's people were in, the furthest back we know was like North Carolina, Virginia, I think.
North Carolina. It's a still,
They
it's
came
still
up the
south.
Underground Railroad and were in Canada, Illinois, Michigan. My dad, well, on her mother's side. On her father's side, they had come up from Mississippi. And on my dad's side, they had come up from Alabama. And they all meet in Michigan.
But it's very south, everything.
Right.
It's mostly south. What I see, the ACME, you know the ACME, is the African Methodist Church.
Say it again? African?
African Methodist.
Oh, AME, yeah, AME, right.
AME. Baptist. What is predominantly in the...
I don't know. I have no idea. There's a ton of, there's like, you have AME, you have Baptist, but then you have like Kojics and holiness churches and everything like that. They're the ones that do a
But
lot
I tell you why this is this both are very specific for me. Because both of them are political organized.
Correct.
And
I don't know that on the ground, a lot of us, at least as kids, we didn't know the difference. The adults maybe, and maybe like the ministers knew, but I never could understand what the difference was.